Okay, today we're going to talk about how to interpret GED political cartoons. Now, this cartoon is from the GED book, and it's page 283 of your homework, and what it shows is something from 1871. Now, for these two questions, it'll tell you, refer to questions 8 and 9 for the following 1871 cartoon. And it's kind of hard to see on here, but if you can see along the bottom of the cartoon, you see some type of title, and it says Tammany Ring. And number 8, question number 8, which you have a copy of, says, in the late 1800s, New York City's government was controlled by an organization called the Tammany Ring. Who do the men in this cartoon represent? Now, the key to reading these cartoons is to make sure you look at everything. Look at the title. Look at any clues, anything that's written in this cartoon, because that will give you a clue as to what this question is about. So if we take a look at this, the first thing I pointed out to you was the word Tammany Ring on the bottom. That's something that the cartoonist definitely wants you to notice. Another thing you should notice is that there are words written on the back of these shirts, and hopefully you can see them on your printout. One of them, I believe, says carpenter. Pay attention to how the men are dressed. As you notice, the men in the front are all dressed very nicely. Suits. As you get around the back, obviously these are working men because they have carpenter, and if you look specifically at this man, he looks almost like a farm worker. He's meant to look like a somewhat of more of a manual labor worker. At the bottom, you see the title, and it says, "'Twas Him." Now, underneath here, it says, "Who stole the people's money?" And as you look closer at each of the figures, this is essential to getting these questions right, is looking at the cartoon itself. Every single person has their thumb or their finger, and they're pointing to the person next to them. So all of these things are things you're going to take into account when you look at these cartoons. So to answer question 8, it says, in the late 1800s, New York City's government was controlled by an organization called the Tammany Ring. Who do the men in this cartoon represent? 1, immigrants living in New York City. 2, skilled and unskilled workers. 3, New York City voters. 4, the elected officials of New York City. Or 5, members of the Tammany Ring. Now, my best information or kind of tip I can give you is to get rid of the ones that you know definitely aren't the solution. Let's take a look first of all at number 3, New York City voters. I don't see anything in this cartoon that would even imply that these are voters. So that would be one that I would immediately, as I'm doing my exam, kind of cross off. If you could limit your options, then that's probably the best thing to do. Next one is 4, the elected officials in New York City. Well, maybe by looking at some of the front ones, you might kind of assume it, but the key to this is never to assume. And nowhere in here does it say they're elected officials. And then some of the ways some of them are dressed, electrician, carpenter, tells you that they're not elected officials. So we could go ahead and cross out option number 4. Okay. Then let's take a look at number 1, immigrants in New York City. Well, definitely by the men dressed in the front. Nowhere in here does it say they're immigrants. So I would say go ahead and cross off option number 1. So now instead of having to choose from 5 options, we've narrowed our options down to 2 and 3. 2 is skilled and unskilled workers. Well, yeah, the picture kind of implies we may have some skilled and unskilled workers based upon the way they're dressed in the front. And obviously the way that this man is dressed, he's obviously dressed less well than these 4 in the front. But then when we start looking at number 5, members of the Tammany Ring, obviously at the bottom, it's very clearly written Tammany Ring. But you have to pay attention because a lot of times we miss these details. So making sure we pay attention to what's in the cartoon is essential. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and select 5, members of the Tammany Ring. Now, question 9 was, what was the cartoonist assuming about the people reading this cartoon? Number 1 says they know the Tammany Ring is considered corrupt. 2, they think all these men are innocent. 3, they have never heard of the Tammany Ring. 4, they think all the men in the cartoon are in prison. And 5, they will not recognize the well-dressed men in the front of the cartoon. Okay. Well, if we have to make an assumption about something, like I said from the beginning, let's cross out all of those that kind of or don't make any sense to the cartoon. So can we say number 4? They think all the men in the cartoon are in prison. Now, nowhere in here does that even imply that. So we're going to go ahead and cross off number 4 because that doesn't make any sense for these. Okay. Then we're going to go to number 2. They think all these men are innocent. Now, I don't think anything really is implying that they think they're innocent. If anything, what are they doing by pointing to each other? They're kind of giving you an idea that they're kind of blaming each other. So let's go ahead and cross off number 2. Okay. And then 3, they have never heard of the Tammany Ring. Well, I don't see anything in this political cartoon that even implies that, or that we would assume that that's true. So we're going to cross off number 3. So now we've narrowed it down to 1 and 5. 1, they know the Tammany Ring is considered corrupt, or 5, they will not recognize the well-dressed men in the front of the room. Well, number 5, they will not recognize the well-dressed men in the front of the room. If that's true, if you notice, everybody in this cartoon has a name written on the back. These are the people we kind of don't know. But, you know, these men, none of them have a title or a name underneath them. So we're going to make the assumption that they will recognize these men in the cartoon. So we can go ahead and cross number 5 out, which leaves us number 1. They know the Tammany Ring is considered corrupt. We know this because it says the title, "'Twas Him." They're all pointing to each other. And "Who Stole the People's Money" is the other title underneath it, and it says "Do Tell." So these are kind of things you need to pay attention to when you're looking at these political cartoons for the GED. Make sure you pay attention to all the details, the wording on the bottom, the titles, the names, and there's little printing here. Make sure you look at all of that. Pay attention to what they're what gestures they're making, the faces they have, how they're dressed. So that's a little clue as to how to go ahead and do those GED political cartoons. I hope that helped you guys with this problem.